and it is escaping me right now, and I'm so sorry. But it's the concept is that if you are treated like a bad person, you start to internalize it and you kind of adopt that role. So these children were being arrested and then, villainized, and they would be like, oh my God. I mean, obviously it was subconscious, but they'd, start to adapt and go into that role and become repeat offenders. And this would escalate, and a lot of them would get criminal records. And this is called the school to prison pipeline because this happens so often, and it is so clearly the cause of police in schools. This funnels directly, like the name, school to prison. And there are so many layers to it. Like, even if we weren't thinking about the police in these schools, these are the schools that have metal detectors. And, if I were a student, even if I wasn't doing anything wrong, if I walked into school first thing in the morning and I was greeted by a metal detector, that would make me, I would feel weird. I would not like it. I would feel like a criminal, even though I haven't done anything wrong. And that would certainly affect my mentality. So the same thing goes if, you're greeted by a bunch of police and they're arresting you and your classmates. So I'm gonna straight up make a bold claim, and police do not belong in schools, like, period, straight up. And I will give you some counter arguments and then debunk them. So many will argue that the police do not do systemically racist harm, which we know is wrong. And sometimes people even will be like, okay, sure, but police are still necessary because what about, mass shootings and everything? Because you see them all the time on the news. But it is very much over exaggerated in the news because, it makes a story. So here's something interesting. Homicide, this is according to everytownresearch.org. Homicide is the second leading cause of death among youths aged 5 to 18, so school aged. But less than 2% of these homicides occur either on school grounds, on the way to or from school, or at or on the way to or from a school-sponsored event. So that's 3 different, like that. I think that covers everything school-related, and that's still only 2% of these shootings. And of the gun-related homicides that do occur on school grounds, 70% are perpetrated by white males. And as I've said many times, schools with police officers are almost always in majority black communities. So they're not really looking for the ones who are causing the problems. Seems counterintuitive to me. Doesn't really make sense. But research also found that almost 100% of school shooting perpetrators showed clear warning signs prior to their incident, and in over 70% of cases, at least one person knew about the perpetrator's plan for violence. And even given all of this, these arguments are framed purposefully to seem like it's all or nothing. This is a logical fallacy because there's always, they make it sound like it's police in school or no police, when this is not the case. Like, police stations are strategically stationed to be close and, readily available for whoever needs it. So if anything, God forbid, were to happen, it's not that hard to pick up a phone and call the police. They'll be there in 10 minutes. They don't need to be there terrorizing black students. And I know that 10 minutes can certainly be the difference between life and death in some cases, but these school shootings happen so rarely. Meanwhile, the negative effects of police on students, specifically black students, happen so frequently, they're so pervasive, that I really think one outweighs the other, Another, I think the second most common counter-argument is that this one's relatively new in terms of gaining traction and actually being entertained. But the idea is that, okay, maybe the police are racist, but we should still have them and just put them through anti-racism training. And a lot of people are in this camp of this belief. So this is interesting because there was, recently a lot of people have been considering this, and people wanted to find out if anti-racism training was effective at all. So there was a study that they did with the New York Police Department, and that was pretty interesting. So the NYPD put their officers through some anti-racism training, and then the people who were conducting the study asked the officers afterwards, what they had learned, how they felt, and almost all of the officers said that, their eyes had been really opened and that they're going to be more conscientious of their actions going forward. Which sounds good, right? Yay, great. But data doesn't lie. And the data, even though they may say that they feel this way, people looked at the statistics of racially motivated arrests and fatalities from before and after the anti racism training, and there was absolutely no difference in the rates of how often these occurred. So it didn't do anything. It might have made them feel like they're less racist, but it really did not do anything. Black people are still dying. So, boom, that one debunked. And I will give credit where credit is due. You know, the idea of wanting to have people in our schools to keep our students safe is, in theory, a good one. But you cannot separate someone from their implicit biases. You cannot separate the police from racism. Like, you cannot do it. There's no way to have one without the other. Also, most of the people who support police officers in schools are white because they haven't had to experience this. They have no idea. If you never have to experience something, you're less likely to see it, you know? It's just, that's how it works. So, essentially, I have just been going off on my anti-police tirade, and you might be wondering, like, okay, fine. Even if we got rid of the police, now what? And I have an answer for you. So before I tell you, let me just set the scene, take a step back, and give you some context to further help explain why I think this is a much better alternative. So, there are children who misbehave. That is a given. But children, it is very rare that students misbehave just because they are bad kids. So when students are misbehaving, it's almost always, if not always, their frustration and unfiltered expression of their unmet needs. For example, if students are experiencing trauma at home, if their family is experiencing food insecurity, they don't even know when their next meal is going to be. They don't know. Or if, they have a health concern that they don't have the resources to properly medicate, all of these things, when you can't have your basic needs met as a human being, you're living in basically fight or flight mode. You're just survival mode because you aren't even able to sufficiently be like, okay, I'm fine, I'm surviving. No, you don't even know. So obviously you're going to act out. And if your basic needs are not met, there's no way you're going to be able to achieve, the higher up things like doing well in school. Like, nobody's going to be thinking about doing well in school if they can't even have proper meals. And there have been numerous studies that, just having a friendly, welcoming, supportive school environment, these students who are experiencing trauma and potentially acting out because of it, will be like, oh, okay, maybe it's okay here. Like, I'm all right. I'm chilling. I'm safe. My teachers love me. It's an okay, safe space. I can, get out of that fight or flight mode. And then they're able to do much better, not only academically, but behaviorally. They are way less likely to act out. So the key then is to create that safe, warm, welcoming, supportive environment. And I'm telling you right now, police are not the way to do that. So here is my proposition for an alternative. Instead of instating police, there need to be more counselors, like way more. And this in itself, more counselors would already be good. But even if possible, to take it a step further and have these counselors know how to do trauma-informed practices and be trained in trauma-informed counseling. Because these students in these low-income, under-resourced, underfunded schools are going through, almost all of them are going through some sort of trauma. It may be different types, but it's almost always there. Because, it's hard, the situational factors, like I already said, like food insecurity, for just one example, it's traumatic as a child, or for anyone for that matter. So, to have counselors specifically trained in how to deal with this and to be, like, aware of and sensitive to these students' traumas would be incredibly productive because the students, they would feel seen, and the counselors, being trauma informed, would get it. They would get what these students are experiencing, and therefore they would know how to best, protect, not protect them, but like support them, nurture them, and help them succeed. And I think not only is this obviously a better solution than the police, but it's also a lot easier. Like, there's no need for them carrying around their guns and stuff. And at the end of the day, it's pretty simple. You have to remember, these are our babies, these are children, these are our students. They are growing, they are learning. Children misbehave, but to treat them like criminals is absolutely not only inhumane, but also just incredibly counterproductive. So, for those listening, I encourage you to think critically about this, maybe do some more research and see what the situation is in your area and if there are police in schools, and to ask people around you to push to make a difference. And I think it is pretty clear that trauma-informed counseling instead of police would be much better for students, like just overall. And I think this is the end of my podcast. So, thank you.